Hey, this is Dan from Watchmaker Appliance Repairs, and today I'm going to be talking to you about what the symbols on your oven function switch, or the names, mean, what exactly they're referring to. Now, if you look inside your oven, usually the first thing you notice is the element in the top, and then there may or may not be an element in the bottom. When we look at the top element, there's actually two elements here. So if you have a look, there's one that runs, this one's a bit dirty, but one that just runs around the outside in a single loop, and there's another one that zigzags in the middle. So the outside one is a bake, or sometimes called a bake assist, and the middle one is the grill. And on grill, you usually turn on both at once. We'll talk about that in a second. Now at the bottom, this one, there is no element, but you will actually have an element in behind there. So underneath the element on the newer ovens for the last about 20 years, they've been put out of sight. It's often called there'll be the lower bake or the main bake, or they call them a clean heat element because it makes it easy to clean the oven without having to wipe around an element. As an aside, because you've got an element under there, if you're running any function that uses that lower element, you don't want to put a tray or tin foil or anything on the bottom of the oven, otherwise it traps the heat in and the enamel will actually crack due to the heat rising up, reflecting off the aluminium or whatever you put in there and overheating the base. So in this oven here, we've got no fan in the back. So this one's a pretty basic oven. We've got bake and we've got grill. So on bake, it's going to run the lower element and the outer top one, and on grill, it's going to run the two top ones together. The controls on this one, it's all on the one dial. So when we turn it on, it'll be on bake. If you go all the way around, it'll click into high, and then there's another click onto grill. So anywhere around here, it's running those top and bottom elements. And then on grill there, it's going to be running just the two top elements together. Now the other way that it's done is with a fan element. Now there are some models, particularly the Simpson ovens, which have a fan without an element around it, and we'll talk about what the functions are called in just a second. But then you've also got these ovens with a fan element as well. So if we have a look at the dial here, we'll see that there's, going anti-clockwise, there's fan forced, then fan bake, and then bake. So bake, around there, that's just the low element, which is hidden in the bottom again. Like I said before, there's no actual element visible there, it's hidden in the bottom, and the one around the outside and the top, exactly the same. Fan bake runs those two elements and the fan, top and bottom element, and then fan forced will run the fan and the element around the fan, not the top or bottom. So if you find on fan forced it doesn't work, then you can always try on bake, because if this element here is blowing, you can still use the top or bottom. Or if the top element's blowing, you can switch to fan and still use the fan. So if we're looking around further on this Fisher and Paykel, we have the fan forced, which is using the fan element, fan bake, which is using top and bottom. Now that's Fisher and Paykel only. We'll talk about Simpson Westinghouse in a second. We have bake and we have defrost. Now defrost runs just the fan, so it's not adding any heat. If the oven's already warm, it'll just circulate the heat around, but it won't actually add any heat, no elements running. Classic bake, that is running just the lower element, heating only from the bottom. To be honest, I'm not much of a chef, so I don't know what functions you usually use that in. Fan grill, exactly what it sounds like. You're running the fan and the grill, which is the two top elements, so the inner one zigzagging the grill and the outer bake one, both turning on together. And then you have, in this one we have grill, which is again, those two top elements without the fan, and eco grill. Not all ovens have this eco grill feature, but that's where it's only going to run the inner grill element and not use the bake element as well. So if you've only got a function of grill, then the grill is going to be both together. If you have an eco grill function, then it's going to run them separately. On the eco grill, just be the inside one. And obviously on grill, you're usually going to have your thermostat set right round towards the maximum, so it doesn't always cycle off. Now sometimes you might have a dial like this one, where we have just got oven and there's no setting for grill. So in this situation, we have a switch over here, which is where it switches between bake and grill. This is exactly the same idea, except there is actually an element you can see in the bottom. This thing's a mess, this one. But we have two elements in the top, and we have one element in the bottom. So if it's set to bake, it's going to run the outer top element and the bottom element, and then when we switch it to grill, it's going to run the two top elements together. Now on the Simpson, the naming is slightly different. you've still got grill. We go counterclockwise there. We have grill, we have fan grill, we have defrost, which is going to run the fan with no heat. Then we've got fan bake and bake. Now in this situation, before on the Fisher and Paykel, fan bake was using the top and bottom elements of the fan, and you had the fan forced. But on the Simpsons, fan bake is using that fan element and the fan, and then on bake is using the top and bottom elements, and without the fan on this one. They don't have a function to use top and bottom elements and the fan. So you just got bake or fan bake there, whereas Fisher and Paykel you have bake, fan forced, which is what they here, and then you've got the fan bake as well. So it's just slightly different naming, but there's a different way of doing it. This Fisher and Paykel, it's a little hard to tell. It's got just a small shroud around the fan. There's no actual element in there. So if we have a look on the dial here, we have very similar to that Simpson. We have bake and fan bake, except in this case bake is going to be top and bottom elements. Fan bake is going to be the top and bottom elements and the fan, because that's what Fisher and Paykel call fan bake. If they had an element around the fan as well, you'd be fan force. So it's just top and bottom elements. Then you've got defrost, which is the fan only, fan grill, and grill. And the same thing all applies if we've got just symbols. So once again, we've got two elements in the top. In this one we have got an element around the fan, and there's an element in the bottom, even though we can't see anything there. It's underneath there. If you do test it, you might find it takes about a minute or two for heat to come through the bottom, whereas because it's got to get through the enamel, where obviously the heat comes through the top element quite quickly. So on the symbols, let's see what we've got here. The first thing we have is a picture of a fan and a little drop of water. So that's the defrost. It's going to run the fan only and nothing else. Everything else, well actually that's, sorry, not the fan, that's actually just meant to be a little ice block, you know, a snowflake. Everything else is just literally showing you lines for elements are running. So top and bottom line mean bake. That's your top and bottom elements. The outer one only on the top and the lower heat. This is the top and bottom element and the fan. Here we've got the fan with a circle around it. So that's your fan bake or fan forced. This is what Fisher and Paykel would call the classic bake, which is, you can see there is a dish there with a drop of water and only a line at the bottom. So it's you know, lower element only. And then we have the fan grill. Normal grill, you've got the zigzag line showing radiant heat because it's going to be radiating more heat rather than just a flat line. And then this here is a fast heat. So you also see this on some Westinghouse ovens. You've got a fan with a circle around it and the top and bottom line, as opposed to over here, the fan doesn't have a circle around it. So this one here is going to run the top outer element, the bottom element, and the fan element. So it's going to get up to heat very quickly, but if you use that for functions, you know, actual cooking, it could end up burning things. So you use that to get the temperature, and then you change to whichever setting you want to use after that.